This all happened when I was 19. I'm not the best looking dude, so I've never had much luck with women, and I ended up on Tinder. I wasn't having much luck there either until like the third month of using it, when a blonde woman named Katie messaged me. She was pretty enough that I just dismissed her as a bot. It wasn't until 3 days later that she messaged me again, which was odd, because bots almost never message more than once. I clicked on her chat and replied, then looked at her profile some more. What I saw was pretty generic, but definitely wasn't a bot's profile. We had been talking for like a month when she proposed the idea that I come see her. I was pretty reluctant, as she lived nearly 8 hours from me by car, but I had to admit I really did like her quite a bit, and I had been thinking about asking her if I could come see her for a while now. After a bit more badgering from her, I finally said that I would take the drive to go see her. At this point, I had no reason to doubt that she was who she said she was. We had video chatted every other week and called most days. I just assumed that I got really lucky. Things did get a little weird on the way there, though. She kept messaging me, asking me where I was, and making sure I was still coming. At some points, when I took more than 30 minutes to respond, she sent me a slew of annoying texts. Admittedly, I had chalked this all up to her being nervous about me coming to see her. I was pretty nervous too, so I couldn't blame her. I had a hard time finding the house at first. The directions she gave me were pretty confusing, and it was back through a series of gravel and dirt roads, and a large thicket of trees. It was still about midday when I came up to an old-looking house. A window on the second floor was boarded up, but it didn't look abandoned. Just worse for wear. Katie's red buggy that she liked to talk about was parked in front of the garage. I took out my phone and texted her that I was here. She only sent a smiley face in return. When I got out of my car to go knock on the door, I noticed someone was looking at me from one of the second floor windows. I found it a little creepy, but I figured it was just her father or something. She had told me that he comes to stay with her every now and again, so I ignored it and knocked on her door. She answered with a smile and even gave me a kiss, which surprised me, and I followed her inside. We sat down on her couch and started talking about her plans when I asked her about her dad. "You didn't tell me your dad was here," I said. "Was that going to be a surprise, or?" Katie looked confused and told me that her dad wasn't here. I still thought she was keeping up the act, and I told her that she didn't have to keep pretending, that I had seen him looking at me through the upstairs window. Katie went pale and said that we had to get out of there now. We both ran out to our cars, and when I questioned her, she informed me that her dad wasn't there and she had been home alone until I showed up. I called the police, and while I was on the phone giving the address, Katie gasped and pointed to the window where I had seen the guy last. He was looking at us from out the window again. I got a better look at him, and he seemed older and frail, almost like he hadn't ate anything in a while. He left the window after he saw that we saw him. The police took half an hour to show up, and the whole time Katie was crying and mumbling about how she was an idiot for not keeping her doors locked. When the police finally did show up, one started asking me and Katie questions, and the other two searched the house. They came back out a little later and told us that they didn't find anyone, but they did find that the back door was hanging open. Whoever it was had ran out into the woods, but the cops were sure the house was empty. After the cops left, she asked me to stay the night because she was too scared to be in her house alone right now. I gladly did, and we slept downstairs on the couch, as her bed was the room next to the one the man had been in. She had also brought out the shotgun that her father had given her, but she never used. I told her that it was fine and that the man was gone, but she insisted, saying she'd feel safer if we headed out. I'm glad she did. Later that night, I was still wide awake watching TV. Katie had somehow managed to fall asleep. In the kitchen, heard the sound of a doorknob being turned. At this point, I wasn't even scared, I was just pissed. I flipped on the light in the kitchen and pointed the gun at the kitchen door, and there he was. The guy that had been in the house before was standing on the other side of the glass door. He looked shocked, and I'm glad we had locked the door. Men unfroze and yet again ran into the woods. I woke Katie up and told her what happened and called the police yet again. When they arrived, they did a sweep of the woods and found no one again. They told Katie and me that it'd probably be a good idea to stay somewhere else for the night. We said our goodbyes. She was going to stay at her friend's house and I was going home. I left a little later after she did. I was on the phone with my brother telling him about what happened. My headlights were on. As I was talking, something caught my eye. That fucking man was standing at the corner of the house just watching me. I gunned it out of there and didn't even bother calling the police again. But I did text Katie and she said she was going to call them again. I don't think Katie ever went back to that house alone. I met a guy on Tinder and we really started to hit it off. We had been chatting for a few weeks and even discovered we had a few mutual friends. I was pretty intoxicated one night and was feeling social, and I decided to call an Uber to his place. Once I got there, we talked outside for a while and ended up vibing even better in person. I opened up to him about my health problems, and he opened up to me about his older sister, who had passed away from a similar condition to mine. I was curious about his sister, but I definitely didn't want to pry. We walked into his house, and it smelled like 1,000 dead rats were rotting under the floorboard. I was still pretty drunk, so I tried to forgive it because, hey, sometimes animals die under a house, or even in the walls, and there's nothing you can really do about it. I start to look around, and the whole house looks like a cluttered storage unit. He takes me to his room, which is seemingly normal, kind of feminine, but that's cool, and we hook up. I ended up falling asleep and woke up around 10 a.m. to the stench of death. I opened my eyes, feeling very sober, and I started to look around the room. I noticed that only girls' clothes were hung in his closet. I start to assume I've possibly been cheated with, and I see a giant black binder on his nightstand. When he woke up, I decided to jokingly ask him, "What's in that giant binder?" Turns out it was every single episode of Golden Girls printed out. He said he read it at work and it's the only show he'll ever watch. Okay. I asked him what he did for work, something I definitely should have known by this point, and he dodged the question. I sat up and looked at the pillow I'd been cozily sleeping on. It had no pillowcase and was covered in what looked like to be old blood. It looked like the blood had been coughed onto it. I started putting the unpleasant pieces together. I asked as sensitively as I could, "Hey, was this your sister's room? I noticed the clothes in the closet." He says, "Yeah, and this is her bed. I haven't changed or washed anything. It just makes me feel better to be in her bed. This is actually where I held her when she died, and you remind me so much of her. I really, really like you." Then casually tried to hook up with me, like he didn't just drop unsettling news. I felt immensely sorry for him, but I needed to get out of there. I made some excuse and left. I decided to not entirely ghost him because of how bad I felt for him. He was clearly dealing with some really dark shit. We kept in contact for a few weeks until I went on Find My Friends app and noticed that he had clearly taken my phone while I was asleep that night and shared my location with himself. I called him and went off. This was not my first rodeo with a stalker type, and I was not dealing with it. He told me he couldn't believe that I thought he would do that, and I'm being a really terrible person, dumping him because his cat recently died. I blocked him. After he said that about his cat, combined with his tendency to hold on to things, it really makes me wonder what that smell actually was. Let's hope not, and though I hope he gets help, I never want to see him again. This happened 3 summers ago, but I remember the main events. To preface this, I've been on a shocking amount of dates and I've put myself in many foolish situations in the past. I'm a female and I was 25 at the time, if it matters. It started on the Plenty of Fish app. I came across a cute guy. He was my type physically, kind of nerdy looking. On his profile, he had very adventurous photos of him hiking and traveling. He seemed really exciting to get to know. Once he saw I looked at his profile, he sent me a message. We flirted a bit back and forth and exchanged numbers, even though he lived about an hour away. He said on the app that he's never been to my city and didn't plan on it, so we probably wouldn't meet. I respected his honesty. I don't like wasting my time. One day shortly after meeting him online, he texted me randomly saying that he's in my town on some work thing and invited me to a bar he was at. I decided to meet up since I was already in the area. He said he would pick me up. I was dumb and agreed, even though it was just over 4 blocks away. It took him way longer than it should have to get me, and I honestly don't think he was actually ever at the bar. Once I was in my date's car, I noticed it was a rental and that it seemed like he had just gotten his license because he was a terrible driver. After driving in circles, he told me to pick a place, but not in the area because parking is impossible. I picked a place that was kind of far away, with lots of parking, but also a busy place since I was with a stranger. Once there, he started pressuring me to drink. He insisted. I'm not a huge drinker, but I enjoy pub-style bars. I caved and had a drink, and was again pressured to have another one. He was very pushy and seemed really irritated that I wasn't going for it. Usually I'd end a date pretty quickly if being mistreated, but he became charming enough to me to keep me there at least until we were done on our date. I saw an old acquaintance at the bar and wanted my date to know that I knew him. In my head, I think I wanted my date to know that someone could identify him. I'm not a paranoid person, but I think my subconscious was on alert. After an hour of talking in the bar, I tell him I'm ready to head out, but he insisted we go across the road to get coffee. At the time, it seemed strange to me. Neither of us had much to drink and didn't need to sober up. Coffee seems like an odd choice otherwise. I entertained it. Once there, we sipped our drinks, and he told me he rented a beautiful Airbnb in a nearby neighborhood that is more out of the city and country. He told me he had it all to himself and invited me, going on about how nice it is. I kept politely saying no and throwing around different excuses, which he would counter with a reason for me to come. With no intention of going, I agreed, but only if he would drive me home to get overnight things. I felt he wasn't going to let me say no. He seemed happy with that answer, so we headed out. While driving in the direction of my place, he said instead he would stop at a 7-Eleven and grab me travel-sized toiletries so I wouldn't need anything. I felt panicked because my plan was to not go with him. Something about him was off, and I felt stupid for even getting back in his car to begin with. He turned his car, and we were then headed toward the more country area. Literally, there weren't any 7-Elevens or open stores. It was the middle of nowhere. Then I mentioned that I'm actually thinking I'd prefer to not stay with him and asked to be brought home. He then said something that made me completely nervous to be around him for much longer. He said he's sharing the Airbnb with the owners and said they are really fun and sweet, and that they drink and play games together. He originally said he had it all to himself. I knew I didn't want to make it obvious that I was catching on to his lies, so I went along with it and said, "Oh, I have to wear my cute fluffy overnight PJs instead of my date dress because I'll be way more comfy." Then I spewed off a few other things. I mentioned that I needed my medication and absolutely can't miss a dose. Surprisingly, he turned around, and as we drove back into the city, I felt a bit more calm, but at that point, not safe. Finally, we got close to my place. I had no intention of letting him close enough to know where I live. He was mentioning that he was going to come up to my apartment once we got there, and that was just a huge hell no. I didn't know what I would do, but I looked for any opportunity to get out of this situation, knowing he could turn around and take me somewhere private in a matter of 15 minutes if he wanted. We got to a stop sign where people were crossing. I quickly but calmly got out and said, "Phew, I think I have a headache. I'll text you." I closed the car door and went through a public park, which was beside a building that his car wouldn't be able to drive into. I looked back to make sure he wasn't getting out of his car or following me, and I could see him staring at me. He was so furious, I have chills thinking about it. Within the hour, he had me blocked on Plenty of Fish. Looking back, I think he possibly wanted to give me a coffee to possibly put something in it. I think he told me on Plenty of Fish that we would never meet, to maybe cover his ass, and I know he didn't have good intentions with me. Since then, I've actually met my fiancé on Plenty of Fish, and I was super careful about dating up until then, making sure the first few dates are very public and to arrange my own transportation.